Hi everyone. Really grateful for taking your time to listen to this session. I hope it's valuable. I hope you find it insightful and interesting. I think product-led growth has definitely been an interesting innovation in terms of growth and product strategy in the last couple of years. And I'm hoping to go into a bit more detail as to how and when you should implement that. I've got a bunch of slides, but I do want to keep it interactive. So think of your questions, and at the end, hopefully we can have a really good discussion around some of those points. So let me go ahead and present. So very quick introduction to myself. My name is Ishaan. I'm a senior product manager at Google. I sit in the commerce org, and I look at payments in particular, a payments product in India, which has hundreds of millions of MAUs. Very, very rare to have such high distribution in one market alone, but has been a fascinating study in terms of product-led growth as well on the B2C side. And as you'll come to know, there are many, many examples of where Google and other companies have done a brilliant job of product-led growth on the B2B side. Prior to Google, I used to run my own startup, which I scaled up to about 200 people. We raised about $40 million in venture capital funding and also had a successful exit at the end. So I have a lot of scars from my startup journey and can empathize with some of the challenges that you will be facing right now. Happy to address questions on that in the end as well. So what will we cover today? Well, firstly, just a definition. What is PLG? What is product-led growth? What does good look like? So I'll share a few examples of companies that do this really, really well and go into a bit more detail as to why they do it well. When might it not make sense? So many people will say, it's the hot new thing, you have to do it, but actually it's not for every company, and I'll talk a bit about why. And finally, some resources where you can go ahead and learn a bit more about this if you're interested and feel it's relevant. So just to start, there's a sort of popular influencer on product management in Twitter, and he posted this tweet the other day as I was preparing for the presentation. I thought I would share it. The top 10 trends that will define product management in 2024. Bear in mind that is for small companies, big companies, B2C, B2B. Product-led growth was right at the top. So like I said, this should be relevant. And to start with, I want to figure out how much people know about the topic already. So feel free to comment in the chat. Don't be afraid. It's nothing too intense as a test. But I want to ask you, which of these would you say is product-led growth? And I'm going to show you two examples. Example number one is RingCentral. And as you can see, there is a book a meeting form on the flow, presumably some call scheduling, and I think you would get a call back. And the next example is Dropbox, who have just introduced a sign feature, which is very similar to DocuSign or an e-signing. So we have RingCentral number one, we have Dropbox number two. Go ahead and put in the chat which one you think is the product-led growth example, and just put a 1 or a 2. I'll flick between the images again so you can see. Okay, Ben is saying 2. Seeing another 2. Okay, we're seeing lots of 2s. Any 1s? No. Okay, fine. Well, you know the basics. It is number 2. The reason for that is, and you'll come to know this, but even just from the user interface, one product is leading with the product. They're showing you the capability of the product. They're showing you the value proposition, and they have a call to action, which is try. So all of the functionality on that website and the funnel is about getting you to try the product and experience its magic up front. Whereas on RingCentral, it's just trying to get your details so that they can qualify you as a lead and get you on the phone to try and upsell. So we'll go into a bit more detail on this. But some of the other examples out there are, Google Workspace, Slack, Notion, Airtable, Zoom, some of the fastest growing companies in the last few years. have taken the priority on product qualified leads and product qualified counts alongside or instead of sales qualified leads. And I'll go into a bit of why. So first, let's start with the definition. What is product-led growth? And I think before we go into that, we should discuss what does it even mean to be product-led. Again, it's a bit of a buzzword. You know, both individuals and companies will claim to investors and perhaps employees, we're product-led. What does that actually mean? So if you look at someone like Notion, this is not a product screenshot, right? Taken from their product. This is their landing page on their website above the fold. They are leading with an image of their product showing the full functionality so that you can see straight away what the beauty is. They think the product addresses a need for the users, which is so strong and so frequently experienced and so deep that you will experience the magic for yourselves and you will want to try. And once you try that, you will have a level of usage on the product, which might require you to upgrade to, let's say, a paid account. So you have gone through the funnel of being acquired through the product, activated through the product through usage, and then monetized through the product as a result of, you know, a great product-led growth-driven loop. So as I mentioned, in a product-led growth model, the leads are generated from that loop. They would sign up, they would use the product, they may invite others to use the product, and many of you will have experienced this through Slack, through Notion, through Zoom. They have built-in network effects, and then they start to generate other forms of value generation, and that repeats. So these types of users are called product qualified users or product qualified accounts. They are qualified as a result of the usage. And if you notice, it's not a sales team or a marketing team or an operations team which is doing the qualified work. It is the product which is doing the qualified work. And why is that brilliant? Well, we all know startups, we are bootstrapped or we have limited funds, and we need to demonstrate a lot of value to get to a milestone of progress, whether that is the next round of funding or whether that is just hitting a goal in terms of customers or revenue. And to do that, we need to do it very efficiently. So product-led growth is a very, very efficient and scalable way of doing so because you don't have all of the headcount costs to qualify your leads. So that's what being product-led is. But what does growth mean? And this might sound a trick question. All of you are thinking, yeah, growth is the like hockey stick chart. It's up and to the right, whether it's users or monthly transacting or revenue. And that's true. But I want to take a very product-focused lens to what growth is. When you double click on the definition, growth is actually helping your users make decisions to take actions that lead to growth. And the key part that I've highlighted is make decisions. Everyone knows what growth is, but if I tell you tomorrow, hey, I want you to grow 10x, that's not actionable. That's not an input, that's an output. Everyone wants to grow 10x. If I now ask you how you're going to do that, there may be some confusion. But this definition makes it a bit more controllable. What you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out what decisions, or rather what actions does a user need to take to lead to growth. That could be filling out a form, it could be downloading the product, it could be entering their card details in a checkout form, it could be inviting their friends or colleagues. The first step is, what are those actions? The step before that is, what decisions do they need to make to take those actions? And that's what we're going to focus on a little bit later, is understanding what is the psychology of users' decisions. And there's something called the Elmer Hill. So a decision would start with an emotional pull. It would be justified by logic. You would need to have enough motivation to get over this metaphorical hill, and then you'll be rewarded that you made the right choice. So this could be worth another session in itself. I will come back to it, but I want to talk about back to product-led growth. So we understand a bit of product-led. hopefully I've given you a new definition of what growth means. So let's merge them together. What is product-led growth? Well, in the purest form, a company that is product-led or implements product-led growth means that the product itself, not the team, not the company, but the product itself has acquired, activated, engaged, monetized, and retained users, funneling them through a payment flow, and most commonly without any human touch or intervention. There's a nuance to that which I'll come later, but hopefully that definition is clear. So today, when you think about growth, perhaps before I've explained the product-led growth model, you may think, well, yeah, we go to Google, we go to Facebook, we buy ads, and users come to our website, and then we try and convert them, and we try and convert them to revenue. Now, that's a very simplified view. Some of you may feel, oh yeah, well, we buy our leads, we try and get their contact details, and then we get the ops team or the sales team, qualifying them, holding their hands through the flow, talking to them about the product. So what I'm describing now is, again, the product qualified versus sales qualified. Those traditional marketing tactics and sales interventions have worked for decades, but increasingly they are very expensive, inefficient, and non-scalable ways of driving growth. And as a result, there's been this new tactics, a new group of companies that is changing the landscape for how consumers and businesses, decision makers in those businesses, expect to see value. These people do not want to be called on the phone, right, and told, hey, here's what our product does. Would you like to arrange a call? Would you like to arrange a consultation call? They want instant gratification. They want to experience the product up front as soon as possible. So product-led growth will give you an opportunity to do that. And I'll talk about 4 steps to that. The acquisition, activation, engagement, and monetization. So to begin with, acquisition. So a user signs up for your product. Now, channels for acquisition, they could be paid channels, but even better than paid channels is either virality, network effects, or advocacy. So advocacy meaning it's a referral. You've used a product, you thought it was so amazing, now you've told your friend about it, and then your friend has downloaded that product or that app. So where the existing experience is a 10 out of 10 and has resulted in sharing it with your network, which drives more signups, that is a very product-driven approach to acquisition. The second is activation. So, okay, you've had the referral, but now you are experiencing not just any part of the product, but the core value proposition of the product for the first time. So in many cases, that will mean overcoming the onboarding process and some sign up, maybe getting enough initial activity in the app until you can experience the core value prop. Once you've done that, there's then the engagement step, which is, okay, you've used the core value prop once, but now are you doing it habitually? Okay, I've downloaded Zoom, I've experienced the quality of the calls and the videos on Zoom, and now I want to use it again and again and again. Or Google Meet, I should say. And then you get to a point where you say, right, now we're actually going to upgrade what we have. We're on a free version, but we want to upgrade it. We don't want a 45-minute cap. We want to access locked features. We want new capabilities, and all of them will come at a cost. That's where you get to the monetization stage. So as you think through your companies and your funnels, think through this 4-step model and the definitions that I've explained. Can we just have a thumbs up if you've heard of Notion? If you click the emoji, I'm sure many of you will have. Cool. Okay, many of you seem to know about it. So Notion is a collaborative sort of document editing software and database software, grown super fast, particularly during COVID, where everyone was sitting at home being very productive, making lists and documents, and the functionality is phenomenal. So Their growth hypothesis is very interesting. Firstly, they target 3 segments of customers: individuals, teams, and enterprises. And when you get to that stage, you may be wondering, hey, Ishaan's been telling us product-led growth is the way, but now we're talking about enterprises. So actually, at this stage, you want to do both. Product-led growth is going to lead the way for individual users and eventually teams, but then sales-led growth is going to be reserved for your high-value, larger accounts. So how could that work in practice? Well, an individual can sign up, they maybe start using the feature, and then they invite others to collaborate. Let's say your few team members. Now you have a self-service way to pay for upgraded access and get more features. Monetization is seamless. And then the team plan can add users and manage payment completely self-served. But then the enterprise use case relies slightly more heavily on sales. There is no self-service option. And the reason for that is, at that point, the level of decision-making process or the seniority of the decision maker is such that there may need to be a consultation. And the ROI, most importantly, the return on the investment that you're doing for an enterprise account is going to be worthwhile having a sales team there. So they're not doing it for absolutely everyone coming through. They're just reserving it from the high value accounts once the account has already been qualified by product usage. And that's because they believe not doing it would be more detrimental rather than doing it, given the cost benefit ratio there. I want to talk about another example, superhuman. So again, just give me let's try a different emoji. Give me a crab if you've heard of superhuman. This one might be slightly lesser known. Any crabs? Awesome. Great. So superhuman is a sort of fancy email client, tries to revolutionize email. Again, actually the founder of Superhuman wrote a phenomenal article on how to measure PMF, which went viral. Would recommend reading on that. So similar to Notion, they have product-led acquisition, engagement, and monetization. But if you look at the middle step, the activation is actually not product-led. The activation is not self-service. And remember, activation is about experiencing the core value prop for the first time. So it's quite early into the customer journey. But instead, Superhuman onboards customers individually with 30-minute calls to get the user to set up and teach them how to use the product. Now, again, there's a nuance here and there's a judgment call. And at the stage that most of your companies will be at, experimentation is key. Superhuman experimented, and what they found is the segment of users that found a product like Superhuman desirable were executives, startup CEOs, investors. They had one thing in common, which is they were very, very busy. They were short of time, and they spent a disproportionate amount of time in their inboxes. So they wanted a tool that could make them radically more effective. Making something radically more, faster or simpler or effective is a pretty sophisticated task. And so what they did not want to do is wait for users to discover that sophistication by themselves. They wanted very early in their journey to open that, to reveal that to users. And the key thing for them is they don't have a free model. So the users were already somewhat filtered out because they were paying $30 a month or something for their first month of usage. It's different to Notion, where yes, there is product qualified usage, but there is no monetary qualified users at that stage. People can start to use it for free. So because they are already monetizing customers from day one, A, they know that these users are committed, and B, they know that they could justify spending a bit of money through a individually onboarded call. And thirdly is, this is something that they've experimented with and they continue to do. So clearly they have found a positive ROI in qualifying them with, or rather activating them through human intervention, and then seeing that impact in terms of long-term retention and the customer lifetime value of the product. So why am I showing you these two examples? Well, firstly, these are both two successful companies that have been growing very fast. These are companies that have been growing fast with relatively lesser funding compared to their growth and their revenue metrics. And third is they both adopt product-led growth, but they adopt it very differently, and they do introduce sales-led models at different stages in the funnel. So why is it important? I've mentioned this already, and some of you, I'm sure, are already figuring this out and starting to think, how can I get this into my business? The first is scalability, and hopefully this is an obvious one. But certain product solutions, and hopefully this applies to many of your businesses, they will allow your business and your product to scale without the need to scale human ops at a linear rate, right? Humans have costs associated with them and complexity. And trust, I saw this as a founder when I grew from 50 people to 100 people to 200 people. It's not just the costs, but the complexity as you increase the size of your organization in things like culture and things like communication, and of course the bottom line, the cost. So if you can enable a product and a business that can scale exponentially rather than linearly, you will see a lot of benefit from that. And most companies find success by layering in product-led growth to different steps of the funnel, the activation, the engagement, and the monetization, and then later augmenting with sales growth, as mentioned earlier. The second is it focuses on value creation. And many of you will be thinking, I need to get my first customer in. I need to start making revenue. I need to start focusing on, subscriptions, depending on what your business is. And before I go to that next investor, I want to show the dollar amount that I'm making. Doing so can actually come at a long-term cost, right? Which is, you may be prioritizing short-term over long-term, and your product may not be good enough to actually compete in the market, at which point you've spent all of that time trying to squeeze money out of your existing products when the product is not actually differentiated and perhaps could have sold itself without you investing that time. So product-led growth focuses a lot more on value creation and value realization, because the product needs to be that good to acquire, activate, engage, and monetize with a very self-service approach. It will build loyal advocates and super fans, which drives customer long-term value, right? Customer lifetime value, and breaks the cycle of having to compete on price. And finally, product-led growth will shift your investment from paid marketing channels to the product. So you might think, okay, well, I want to do this really well. I was going to spend X amount of money on, advertising platforms. But now I'm going to take that money and I'm going to invest it into product. I'm going to make sure I've got the right kind of product team in terms of a product manager, a designer, maybe data analyst. And I'm going to shift, as a founder, as a CEO, more attention towards driving growth from those channels, which is going to, help avoid bidding wars, right, on well-known ads platforms, let's say, but something that will help in the long run. Now, I do want to give a word of caution. These benefits come at a cost. And so Elena Verma, who's a growth advisor, former head of product at Amplitude, current growth advisor at Dropbox, she says, with product-led growth, there are no band-aids, right? There are no plasters. The user has to be able to understand and use the product entirely on their own. sales and marketing does not do as much to tape together the imperfections. This is really, really brilliant as an insight, because think of your product today. Now, imagine you as the founder who know your product better than anybody else are sitting next to a customer. Would you feel confident to handhold that customer and explain how brilliant it is and how it solves their problems and why they should try out the advanced features and why they should pay for it? I'm sure you would, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing this. Now take yourself out of that. Is the product capable of doing the same thing? Then you might be umming and ahhing, and maybe you're less sure. So in other words, the product needs to be so good that an individual can adopt it without any setup, support, or hands-on help from another human, right? Other than, let's say, an escalation. Delivering that kind of experience takes a ton of resource and alignment at the organizational level. And that's why I think this philosophy, if you think it's for your company, if you think it's for you, is important to embed very, very early on in your company, because it becomes much harder to shift at scale when your organization is set up a different way. So when does it not work? And I think this is when you should be able to filter, knowing your own businesses, if it is for you or not. The first time is if there's a long time to value in your product. So I mentioned the core value proposition is the activation stage. Now, if you feel in your product it may take months, right? Because there is just an industry standard long sales cycle, or because the problem that you are solving just maybe takes weeks or months to actually materialize value, then it's probably not great for a product-led growth strategy. If it also requires a ton of setup, which for some reason is very difficult to digitize or automate at this stage, or productize at this stage, then perhaps it's not going to be great. Secondly, if it's not collaborative in nature, all of the features I mentioned to you earlier, Google Workspace, Slack, Zoom, Atlassian, Notion, all of these are collaborative. All of these are Airtable, all of these are very easy to get more and more people on there. It starts off with a very small atomic network, and that network shares it with other networks, and then eventually the network becomes bigger. You have lots of people using the product, and then you upgrade and you need more features and more storage and so on and so forth. The product can do the work there. If it's not collaborative, right, and it's hard for users to spread the product to their teams, then it's going to be challenging as well. And finally is, if you have external pressures, there is a high upfront cost to doing this well, as I mentioned. And it can be very, very difficult to do so. So if there are pressures, whether they're funding or growth pressures, which are short-term in nature, then it might be the wrong timing. Doesn't mean the wrong philosophy, but maybe the wrong timing. And that judgment call would be up to you. So I promised I would go back to how users make decisions, because I think you all understand the product-led piece now, but on the growth piece, what do you actually have to do as those executing on your product? Well, first is understand how do users make decisions. You as founders, as operators in the business, you're thinking, hey, what's my CAC? What's my LTV? What's my growth rate? What's my revenue run rate? What's my conversion? What's the funnel? Users don't think like that. Users are looking at your product thinking, what does this do? How does it work? Why should I use this? Why should I pay for this? And getting into that user's mindset is critical when you start evaluating the product that you've built or creating the product that you're going to. So let's go back to that Elmer decision hill that I mentioned, looking like this. So the 4 steps of that are emotion, logic, motivation, and reward. And the reason that there is a hill is because to perform any action, there is, of course, a level of friction required. So firstly, emotion leads the way for decision making, right? People are drawn to emotions, whether that is fun, whether it is fear, whether it is belonging, whether it is love, relationship, whatever that might be. There is typically an emotion which is the stronger drive in a human's brain, which leads the way to make a decision. Then what we do very, very quickly afterwards is we try and justify and rationalize that emotion. We say, oh, this is a good deal, or oh, this is really practical, or oh, I saw this as one of the top rated products, or like, oh, so and so has one and they always buy great stuff. So logic comes very quick to sort of counter emotion and make sure that they are in sync. Then what you get is the motivation. So now you've decided you want to do it, but actually doing it is the next task. And motivation gets us to complete the action. It is a function of both ability and motivation. And I'll talk about that more. And finally is the reward. This is the confirmation that we made the right decision. I always like to give the example of, going to a restaurant, maybe fancy restaurant, and you're looking through the menu and different options sound nice. Some sounds nicer than others. And you ask the waiter to come over and you say, oh, which thing should I order? What's your specials? And the waiter tells you some of the options. Eventually you say, okay, I'll have this option. And the waiter says, excellent choice. When they're saying that excellent choice, that is the reward. That is the confirmation that you have made the right decision. That makes you feel, like a bit of relief or a bit of private, happiness with yourself. So have this metaphor when you're looking at your products, either the entire product, one funnel, or even one screen as you're going through. So let's go into a deep dive on two areas, motivation and reward. Motivation, I want to talk about something called the FOG behavior model. So very simply, you have ability on one axis and you have motivation on another axis. And what it means is if the motivation to do something is so low, then even if your ability is high, meaning it's a very easy action for you to perform, you will not do that action. Equally, if your motivation is really high and this is something you really want to do, but the ability is low, you will not complete this action. So in order to get a user to do what you want them to do or what they want to do themselves, it needs to be above a threshold of both motivation and ability. And I'll tell you how to do that. So for motivation, things that can drive motivation are factors like scarcity, urgency, a bargain, right? A discount, and trust. If a user feels like, oh, this is limited edition or in limited supply, the motivation increases. If they feel, oh, I only have 2 hours to do this, the motivation improves. If it is 50% off, I feel like I'm getting a deal, the motivation increases. And if there is a trust factor, the motivation increases. Equally, ability. So let's say my motivation is high. Now, if I don't have the time to do it, maybe my ability is low. If I don't have the money and I simply cannot afford it, maybe my ability is low. If cognitively, right, the complexity of doing the thing is too high, maybe I don't have the ability to do it. I can't find where I need to press or what I need to do to progress to the next stage. And finally, social, right? If it's not something that I see other people really doing, maybe my ability is low. So let me give you an example. And personally, I think this is a little bit overkill, but it seems that worked very well for them. So this is a listing on booking.com or Agoda, hotels booking site. And I show you a few examples, right, of what I've just said. So where do you see trust ratings? Well, you see it's excellent. You see the number of reviews, you see the actual review, and you see it's a guest favorite. Then you also see 5 stars and a thumbs up. So trust is like everywhere on here. Then where do you see a bargain? Well, you see free cancellation, right? Free cancellation is also an ability factor because, hey, I can cancel it for free. So yeah, of course I have the money to do it because if I don't like it, I can just cancel for free. You also see the scarcity factor. Only 5 like this on our site. So not only are they implementing these tactics, but they are also using different UI components like colors and visual hierarchy to emphasize them to the user. So like I said, be careful with this. I think it depends on the nature of your product. If it is a very serious product, if it is financial services or something like that, you don't want to do overkill. If it is something slightly lighter, more consumer oriented, something which is kind of not too serious as a purchase, that doesn't mean in value terms, it just means the nature of a purchase, right? If I saw this on a hospital booking site or a doctor's, I would feel very put off. Whereas if I saw this on a gaming website, I would think, awesome. Now, reward. So there are 3 types of rewards. There are extrinsic rewards, there are intrinsic rewards, and there are social rewards. So social is perhaps the obvious one, right? We all use some form of social media. We all are familiar with the like button or the heart button or a kudos on Strava. This is something social. Now, if this is relevant for your product, this is an awesome thing to tap into, especially if it is a community-driven product. You must do this. Similarly, there is intrinsic rewards. So what do you feel internally? What is your internal reward for doing something? Superhuman, who I mentioned, which have an email client, they reward you with this beautiful image once you get to inbox 0, right? So imagine I have 20 emails in my inbox, and Superhuman is helping me kind of go through those emails super fast. And I go archive, 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 reply, delete, archive, archive, and then I get to 0. Imagine if all I saw was just an empty screen. It would feel pretty underwhelming because I felt like I've accomplished something. I've cleared my inbox. I feel good about myself. They reward you with this beautiful image of nature, which is just, really pleasant to look at. And it's also shareable on social media if you would like to. In terms of a game, intrinsic could be mastery, like you have achieved master level or level 10, congratulations. The other is extrinsic. So extrinsic are external types of rewards, which could be a reminder of you've saved this much time, or perhaps you've saved this much money. So if you're familiar with the money transfer service Wise, or formerly TransferWise, they will always tell you at the end of a transfer, you saved X amount of money, and your money was sent in 1 minute 32. Wow, that was fast. So they're reinforcing their core value proposition, the same time as granting you a reward because you feel good about yourself for using that service. You're more inclined to use it again and again and again. That's why rewards are so important. And in terms of factors, if you repeat the same reward over and over and over and over again, at some point it will start to have lesser impact. You will dilute the impact. So one is just variability, right? Whatever the right form of reward for you is, make it different each time. It's a surprise element to it, and it will feel good. The second is the magnitude. If you are rewarding your users for completing certain tasks, can the reward, whatever form it's in, get bigger so that it is in line with the size of the task that the user has completed to earn that reward? And finally, the other factor is the frequency. Could you be giving more rewards? And again, if you're realizing the 2 sections I've just presented now on motivation and reward tend to be more consumer-oriented tactics, right? Everything earlier than that on the PLG side was more B2B tactics. Now, both of them are tactics. The philosophy itself can be applied to both B2C and B2B, and you should be careful to apply the right tactics based on what your business is. But these are very effective tactics for rewards. So finally, a recap. Number 1 is product-led growth is very hot right now. It is a huge buzzword, but really it is a remix of past concepts. If all of you are familiar with being product-led and product market fit, It is really just a combination, and growing your business sustainably and efficiently. It is really just that packaged into a new term. The second is done well. It drives scale, it drives efficiency and advocacy. It will create loyal super fans from your user base. Number three is it takes time and it takes money. And even then, it's really, really hard. The companies that I mentioned to you all have users in the hundreds of millions, either listed companies or valued at well over billions of dollars, and typically serial founders. So it's really, really hard. And finally, it is catered to B2B, right? Product qualified leads versus sales qualified leads. But when you understand the core concepts of being product led and how to understand the psychology of how users make decisions, it is just as relevant to B2C companies as well. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you everyone for joining. Want to remind you that the next week's session is going to be the last one, so I hope to see everyone again as well.